How to do this video without offending people? Impossible. Okay, so here's my workaround. I have 5 different types of intelligence here, but I'm not going to put the types into just one of them. I'm going to go through each type of intelligence and rank the types for each one. Okay, so let me define these different types of intelligence. IQ is the standard and most reliable measure of intelligence. I do have some issues with that, to be honest, because it's a test and by definition it's not going to capture people who did badly on the test for a variety of reasons. Then again, it does have very strong predictive power. These different types of intelligence I have here are general descriptions that I think have merit and basis in reality. I should say, however, that intelligence is a very fluid and complex thing, and I would say still poorly understood in its variety. So I'll put these different definitions on the screen, read them out to you, then I'll finally move on to actually ranking the types. So, logical. This includes logical reasoning and mathematical intelligences. Generally, it describes the ability to solve certain types of problems, particularly ones that can be solved non-verbally. It describes people who can spot logical inconsistencies and make accurate inferences. In some ways, it's like the conventional intelligence. Second is linguistic. This includes the wordsmiths of the world, verbally fluid people, people who are excellent communicators, great writers. It also includes people who are good at word games too. The next one is kinesthetic. This is bodily intelligence. Hand-eye coordination. The ability to judge the precise way you need to react physically, then to actually do it successfully. The most obvious examples of this would be sports people, martial artists, dancers, but it isn't restricted to them. This is probably the type of intelligence most people would say shouldn't be classed as one, but I totally disagree with that. The last one is interpersonal. This could have been called social intelligence, but many introverts wouldn't resonate with that, despite the fact that they might be excellent with people, but in smaller groups and in a one-on-one capacity. This is simply how well you can deal with people, reading social and emotional cues, being able to mix with a wide range of people, having a high level of empathy, and interpersonal communication skills. Okay, so I'm going to rank all of the types for logical intelligence. Let's start with ESTPs. ESTPs are very logical and actually are one of the types who avoid getting swayed by many kinds of biases that come from being overly speculative. TI in combination with SE gives a very pure and grounded logical mindset. So this is a straightforward one. I think I'm going to go with likely. The reason I wouldn't put them in highly likely is because their inferior NI can trip them up sometimes where there are situations that require intuitive leaps. They can lean towards being overly simplistic in their intuitive insights on occasion. Let's look at a similar type. ISTPs. Again, this is a fairly easy one. Being TI DOMs in combination with second slot SE, then third slot NI, make them extremely logical, both when it comes to the sensory and abstract realms. I've often described them as hybrids in that sense, who blur the lines between intuitives and sensors. They can hang with both and feel comfortable and capable in both areas. Having inferior FE really doesn't have much bearing on this kind of intelligence, so I'm going to put them in highly likely. Okay, let's look at ENFJs next. Obviously, ENFJs have inferior TI, so the pure logical reasoning when it's detached from being verbal or interpersonal is going to be more difficult. That being said, their TI is going to improve over the course of their life, and the intuitive functions can often be very logical in themselves as well. I think I'm going to put them in possible rather than unlikely, but maybe that's just because I'm a nice person. Okay, so ESFJ next. Are ESFJs going to be higher or lower than ENFJs? I think they're less likely to engage their TI as much as ENFJs. I think their creativity is underestimated, but their detached logical reasoning powers are probably correctly estimated. So I'm going to put them in unlikely. Let's do INFJ next. INFJs are underrated in this area, I believe. While they might give more weight to the emotional appeals in certain situations, they still understand the logical arguments involved and the logical implications. It's something I very rarely see INFJs struggle with, and in some cases, they really relish the logical and intellectual sides of, well, life. I'm going to put INFJs in likely. Let's do ISFJ next. Again, I think like INFJs, they're definitely underrated in this area. I even speculated in a previous video that I think that a lot of INTPs could mistype as ISFJs. So I'm going to put them in likely alongside their INFJ, you guessed it, brethren. Okay, let's do ENTJs next. ENTJs definitely don't have any problems with logic, but they're going to prioritize getting things done and making things work. So if something is doing the job, they're not going to feel compelled to dig into any potential logical issues underlying the thing. Nonetheless, it's in no way a weakness for them, and they are constantly trying to solve problems in the most logical way. So I'm going to put them in likely. Let's do ESFP next. Well, having blind spot TI is not a good start for ESFPs, and having their intuitive function as the bottom function doesn't help either. I don't think that ESFPs are going to do too well with this type of intelligence. I think it's just a bit too boring for them, to be honest. I will say that if you think you're going to come out on top in a battle of wits with an ESFP, don't be so sure. Still though, for this one, I'm going to put them in unlikely. Okay, let's do INFP next. I can't say INFPs are going to be terrible at this kind of intelligence, but at the same time, it won't appeal to them that much. It might seem quite sterile and clinical. I'm torn between possible and likely, but I think I'll put them in possible for now. Let's look at ISTJ next. ISTJs are pretty balanced on being able to be organizational and structured, whilst also being quite logical in the conventional sense. Although they can be a bit rigid sometimes, or more than sometimes, it's more out of a preference for structure than being illogical. So I think I'll put them in likely. My gut instinct is that ESTJs, which we'll do next, will be in the same boat. ESTJs can sometimes be so concerned with getting the job done that they don't have much time to ponder logical puzzles. That being said, like ENTJs, I see them solve logical problems whilst being in the thick of things and trying to get things done. Definitely exponents of practical logic. And if you can pull them away from checking boxes on their to-do list, I think they'll be okay with logical puzzles and logical reasoning in general. So I'll put them in likely. Okay, let's do the rest of these in the order they come up. So ENTPs, pretty easy one here. Although they aren't going to be as logically pedantic as other types, they're going to be extremely capable of logical problem solving, so it makes sense to put them in highly likely. ENTPs tend to use their logic as a tool and can be very quick with it as a result, but there are other types that follow the logic more deeply than them. Their logic still tends to be in service of their NE. Okay, so INTJ. Strangely, I think INTJs are more logical than and also more emotional than ENTJs. ENTJs have the edge when it comes to moving quickly and leading people effectively, but INTJs have the advantage in the depth of their ideas and the individual passion and drive they bring. I think this is a straightforward one. I'm going to put them in highly likely. In some sense, having high intuition in combination with the thinking function lends itself very well to abstract and impersonal logic. So ISFP next. So that detached, impersonal, non-verbal and mathematical-esque logic is not something ISFPs are going to be into that much, and I would say probably wouldn't be too good at either as a result. You guys will do better later on in the video, so I'll put you in unlikely for now, and we can just move on. So INTPs. I mean, no surprises for this one. If there was a too logical category, they would certainly be in that. TI in tandem with NE is a really impressive combo for combining that linear logic with injections of creative and lateral thinking. So highly likely for INTPs. Finally, we have ENFPs. ENFPs can be philosophical, creative, and intellectual, but this type of conditional logic where you iterate through if statements, if this then this, then if this then this, and therefore this, and so on. Also, like ESFPs, they have blind spot TI, so I think I'll put them in unlikely. So those are the rankings for our first type of intelligence. On to the next one. Linguistic Intelligence. So let's do this list in order. ESTJs first. Most ESTJs I've encountered, once you interact with them in a friendly way versus a work-related way, can be excellent storytellers and very quick-witted. I'm going to put them in likely. Sometimes they can be blunt and harsh in communication, but again, I think that's when you encounter them in a workplace setting where their focus is just on getting the job done. Okay, ISTJs. ISTJs can be brilliant at telling stories and jokes because they make them so detailed. They also refine and perfect those stories and jokes over time. I've had the experience of hearing ISTJs tell the same stories every year, and despite the fact that you know the punchlines and the stories, the delivery does improve. They also like crosswords and word games in my experience, but definitely lean towards ones that reward knowledge more than lateral thinking. So more likely to do a conventional crossword versus a cryptic one, which is fine. I'm going to put them in possible. Having blind spot FE will lessen their ability to adjust their communication to suit different audiences and groups. INFP. I'm always wary of falling into stereotypical descriptions, but the tendency of INFPs to be great writers makes a lot of sense to me. They have a very individual style of communicating, and they like to play with language and expression. In my experience, they also do well on the stupid word games I like to throw at them. So I'm going to put INFPs in the highly likely category. I should say that their linguistic skills will tend to manifest much more in written form than verbal. ENFP next. I mean, this is an easy one too. They're going to be absolutely brilliant exponents of linguistic intelligence. Think of someone like George Carling, who didn't just tell jokes and stories on stage, but would also flex his wordsmithery. So the NFPs are doing well, both in highly likely. Okay, ESFP. This is an interesting one. So ESFPs are what I would describe as linguistically refreshing. They are unpretentious in their speech, which can often be more impactful as a result. But high linguistic intelligence, I'm not sure, to be honest. They're likely to see playing with language for its own sake kind of pointless, and maybe even silly. So I'm going to put them in unlikely, which I think is 2 in a row. ISFP next. Are they also going to be in the unlikely category with the ESFPs? The problem here is that I personally know ISFPs who are very good at writing, poetry, etc. I think that being introverted, wanting to achieve self-expression, valued NI, these things definitely can result in someone who would be attracted to exploring writing. ISFPs can be pretty quiet around people often, so it's hard to tell with them sometimes. I'm going to put them in possible, but maybe they belong in likely. As always, you can file your complaints down in the comments below. INTJ. Again, in writing, they can be excellent. Being NI DOMs and also having blind spot FE means they're going to be simultaneously abstract and unusual in their thinking, but will also struggle to communicate with the humans. They do enjoy things like word puzzles though, and have a dry, sometimes brutal wit. I think INTJs can lean towards being overly perfectionistic with their communication because they want to capture exactly what they're thinking, which is often impossible, and they're not always as smooth, so I'm going to put them in possible. ENTJ next. So they're going to be either higher or at the same level as INTJs, I would think. They can be charismatic and commanding communicators, although sometimes they're going to come across as well-developed linguistic algorithms as opposed to warm humans. Despite that, they are still effective though. Sometimes they see language as a means to an end rather than something to play around with, so I think I'll put them alongside the INTJs in possible. ESFJ. Being FE DOMs and having valued third slot NE is quite a great combination for in-person communication. Also, they can be great storytellers like all of the high SI types can be. I think ESFJs have good linguistic fundamentals. They never seem awkward or out of place in conversation. They can be funny in text form and verbally. They can read the room. They have a natural facility with words. I think they belong in likely, maybe even highly likely, but I'll put them next to the ESTJs for now. I think what holds them back from being in highly likely is they're going to be less experimental with words. ISFJs, this is quite an interesting one. So compared to ESFJs, they might be less chatty and comical in communication, yet they might also be more into word games, puzzles, and just more analytical with language in general. I'm leaning towards likely for ISFJs. If you're an ISFJ, let me know where you would rank yourself on this one, whether you think that you are strong on linguistic intelligence. For example, if you want to communicate something to someone by text, written form, or in person, do you feel confident in your ability to get your point across? I think I'm going to put you guys in likely. INTPs next. INTPs are highly likely to be big fans of puzzles because of their love for definitive and conclusive answers for things. So most INTPs relish being able to play with language and see it as a creative tool as much as a communicative one. I think highly likely makes sense for INTPs. Even though it's certainly true that they can sometimes struggle with expressing themselves concisely in person, they often think more clearly than they speak, but they can wield words very well when they want to, and try to. Okay, ENTP next. I don't think I know any ENTPs that fail to have a strong facility with language. I think it just comes with the territory of being an NE DOM. The TI makes them adept at puzzles and analysing language, whilst their third slot FE makes them very good in-person communicators. So I think the highly likely category, or the NE category, clearly. Okay, so ENFJs. Maybe we'll get our first NI user in that top row. Probably one of the most natural communicators amongst the types. Socially smooth, able to speak to a large variety of people, very adaptable and reactive in conversation, and typically very witty too. I think I'm just going to put them in highly likely here. I feel like ENFJs get a good time on this channel. Maybe I should increase the harshness. So INFJ next. INFJs are extremely good communicators in my experience, although they definitely prefer one-on-one interactions to communicating with big groups. Writing skills they're great with, and third slot TI is a powerful weapon when it comes to all kinds of logical tasks. I think they're just another member of the highly likely category. ISTP. Well, I do know ISTPs who are wordsmiths, but I don't think it's common for them. They are kings and queens of the one-liners, but they tend to minimize the amount they have to speak at all, often. Talk is cheap will definitely be an ISTP mantra. I'm going to put them in possible. Finally, we have ESTPs. In conversation, ESTPs are very quick, reactive and responsive, to the point where they can often be mistaken for ENTPs. I think they can also get bored of too much talk, preferring action instead, like the ISTPs. And similarly, they might just not see the point in word games. I think, again, possible for ESTPs. Okay, I should reevaluate this because having ESFP down the bottom on their own just seems kind of lonely. I think I'll move ISTPs down, and I'm tempted to move ESTPs down as well. Let's leave it at that for now and move on to our next ranking. Okay, so kinesthetic intelligence next. Okay, let's start with ESTP. ESTPs are going to be naturals at this kind of intelligence. It's a very frustrating experience when you're trying to perform some kind of physical task, whether that's a sport or learning a musical instrument, and your brain knows what to do, but your body won't listen. Well, ESTPs can get their bodies to listen more than other types, or at the very least, they have a better baseline to start off from. So let's put them in highly likely. Let's do ENFJ next. Having third slot SE means ENFJs will see the sensory and kinesthetic world as something they want to indulge in. They have a good eye for aesthetics and design, and when that's in combination with their dominant FE, they can really create things that other people like. I don't think ENFJs are going to struggle in the world of sport either, so I'm going to put them in likely. Let's do ENTP next. In my experience, ENTPs can be almost comically non-physical and oblivious to the physical world. They aren't going to be terrible though, so maybe they should go in possible for now. Let's look at ISFJ. So there are funny overlaps with the cognitive functions and how they manifest. For example, a high FI user might value logic, and a high TI user might see the logical need to be highly empathic, and so on. Quite a few of the ISFJs I know play sports and are actually very good, but it could also be because certain sports are traditionally done here in Wales, so they might value that aspect of it. I think that introverted sensing is also adept at physical pursuits. Still, I'm leaning towards possible instead of likely for this one. Okay, let's group these next ones together. Let's do INFJ and INTJ. I think I've mentioned this before about the types with SE inferior, so the INFJs and INTJs. Despite the fact that it is a weakness for them, they can sometimes be very perfectionistic with sensory details. Like all types, they want to become good at their inferior function over time, even though it doesn't always go as smoothly as they'd like. I've seen INFJs and INTJs excel in specific physical pursuits. They can obsess over something until they've used their other functions to figure out how to nail the SE-like activity. So despite having low SE, I think they actually both belong in the possible category. Let's look at ISTJ next. My initial reaction is that ISTJs are just going to be in the category with the ISFJs, so possible. I don't see their functions pointing in either direction very much, and although the ISTJs I know tend to be more intellectual than physical, that's not necessarily a very good barometer, so I think I'll put them in possible. What about ESTJs? ESTJs, in my experience, really do love to be physical, whether that's simply working out or actively pursuing sports and some other kinesthetic interest. In the socionic system, they have demonstrative SE, so they have good access to both types of sensing functions. Also, having TE and NE will help them channel that sensory skill in a problem-solving way, so I think I'll put them in likely. Okay, ENFP is an interesting one. I've noticed ENFPs be very good at a certain subset of kinesthetic activities. Playing musical instruments, doing all kinds of artistic activities. I think those things qualify. Again, they don't strike me as the most natural kinesthetic creatures, so let's put them in possible. Okay, let me bunch together INTPs and INFPs. Both of them have extroverted sensing as their blind spot function. Out of all of the types, they're the most out of touch with their bodies. This can manifest in being clumsy, missing things in the sensory environment, being neglectful of themselves and their physical needs. They're so often in their heads, which, in their defense, is often a more enjoyable and intriguing place to be than the real world. Like anyone or any type, they can of course become good at kinesthetic intelligence, but it's not going to come naturally to them. For that reason, I think they both belong together, but in unlikely. Okay, so ESFPs next. ESFPs, by virtue of their dominant SE, will be excellent in this area. They'll be capable in the competitive physical fields as well as ones focused on expressing their individuality. It's important to point out that not every ESFP is going to resonate with this, and many ESFPs might be much more intellectual or indeed linguistic than all of the stereotypes imply. Still, as far as the likelihood of them having natural or innate capacity in this area, I think they do belong in highly likely. My guess is that ISFPs will be up there as well. Okay, so ISFP next. ISFPs check all the boxes in this area. While they might lack the detached analysis that ISTPs bring to certain kinesthetic pursuits, they will be equally adept at being able to react and adapt in the moment, having great hand-eye coordination, and also blending creativity, artistry, and aesthetics. So I think they belong in the highly likely category. I definitely see a trend in that top category. So ESFJ next. So ESFJs won't suffer from any of the disembodied issues attitudes that the intuitives will have. They're also balanced with their second slot SI and demonstrative SE. Like a lot of these types for this sort of intelligence, there isn't really anything that they need to overcome in order to be good at it. So I think I'm going to put them in likely rather than possible. So ENTJs next. ENTJs generally love to indulge in the sensory. It's a source of relief as well as indulgence. There are some famous sports people who spring to mind that I think are ENTJs that most people might type as ESTPs even. ENTJs are adaptable, are totally fine being in the thick of it and having to react physically to things. They're also known to push themselves physically, so they're going to embrace things like sports and physical competition in general. I wouldn't doubt their abilities in other kinesthetic pursuits either. That being said, they still aren't going to be as instinctively able in this area as the high SE users, so I'm going to put them in likely. Finally, we have ISTPs. ISTPs might be at the top of the list for kinesthetic ability. Although ESTPs and ESFPs are going to be excellent in scenarios where quick, immediate reactions are needed, ISTPs might have more control over their kinesthetic powers. They can wield it more like a tool when it's sandwiched between the logical TI and the insightful NI. So again, like all the other high SE users, ISTPs are in the highly likely category. So this last one is called interpersonal. I'm debating whether this should exclusively be whether people like you and you have conventionally healthy relationships with people, or whether it should also include things like being able to lead people well, charisma and charm, that kind of thing. For example, imagine a leader who gets people in an organization or a team to perform brilliantly and motivates them, yet is not necessarily liked by the people. Would that person still qualify as having good interpersonal skills? Because they are getting people to do what they want, so to speak. It just lacks the friendliness. Okay, let's start with ESTJs. They can certainly be strident and forceful in their views and are more than willing to get into heated exchanges when arguing their point. That being said, they can also get people motivated to work hard and can be pretty witty and social as well. I think I'll put them in possible. Okay, ENFJ next. The archetypical social masterminds. Comfortable in pretty much any social area and possess this innate social algorithm that will keep adjusting itself until it finds the precise calibration for whichever social situation they're in. No brainer here. Highly likely. Okay, ENFP next. A well-developed ENFP is going to be highly likely, but what about the average ENFP? Lots of wit, humor, eccentricity. They love engaging with people from different backgrounds and tend to be pretty eclectic in their friendship groups. That being said, if they're too strident in their views sometimes when younger or at any age really, that could definitely alienate people. Still, they are pretty hard to deny, so I'll put them in likely. Okay, ENTJs. So ENTJs are one of the types that prompted what I said before talking about this section. They can lead well, organize and marshal people well, but this isn't the same as being liked by the people they are leading. ENTJs are naturally forceful. This can sometimes be wrapped up in charm or charisma, but you always feel the forcefulness underneath it. I think this is just inevitably going to be divisive, so it's hard for them to be liked by everyone. I think ENTJs would agree with the phrase, to make an omelette, you need to break a few eggs. I'll put them in possible. ENTJs who make a point of trying to improve this area of their life can succeed extremely well. Okay, so ENTP next. ENTPs are able to mix and match with all kinds of people from different backgrounds. Possibly they're the most egalitarian type in this respect. They're great at both sides of interpersonal skills that I mentioned, both the nice and the more devious sides. They can sometimes be argumentative. Not every ENTP is like that, of course, but even mature, well-developed ENTPs love a good debate. And for most people, debates can sadly become arguments very quickly. I'm going to put them in likely because, dare I say, sometimes they can offend people despite their strong social skills. Okay, ESFJ next. I think that ESFJs, more than any other type, can make others feel comfortable straight away. You instantly feel like you already know them and have a good relationship with them, even if you've only just met them. Some people and types just know what to say to avoid awkwardness and to set you at ease. This is definitely not a skill to be overlooked. People like to deal with people they feel good around. So no surprises for putting them right at the very top in highly likely. Okay, ESFP next. ESFPs are definitely capable of charisma, charm, and being captivating. They are the archetype of the star in their ability to court attention. This can be double-edged though and rub people up the wrong way. I want to put them towards the top, but I can see them being divisive as well. It's between possible and likely. I think I'll go with likely. Okay, ESTP next. ESTPs almost always have a certain roguish charm. They can navigate the back and forth of relationships very well and don't take things personally that often, which is handy. They can motivate people to action extremely well and have a strong sense of interpersonal or power dynamics between people. On the other hand, they can overwhelm people sometimes or be too bold and brash for certain types, which can definitely cause issues. On balance, I'd say they belong in likely. Okay, INFJ. As I mentioned at the very start, INFJs are going to be exceptional when they are one-on-one with people. It's not that they're bad in big groups, it's just that they have such a strong preference for smaller, more introverted interactions. Highly empathic and analytical when it comes to people. Able to counsel, mentor, and teach very well because they'll adjust their approach to suit the individual they're interacting with. When you have a well-developed INFJ, it's remarkable how well they can avoid making any kind of social blunder. I'm going to put them at the top in highly likely. Okay, INFP next. Being individualistic by definition means some people won't see eye to eye with you. This strikes me as something that INFPs are more than willing to accept as a consequence of living authentically. So INFPs might not even care about playing this interpersonal game. I must say, I think that possible fits INFPs very well. Okay, INTJs next. INTJs are something of a weird one because they aren't great in this area, but people often give them a pass because it's obvious that it isn't meant personally. Well, most of the time. That being said, the bluntness is real. INTJs are aware that there are social cues which are important, but I always get the sense they think, but are they really important? I mean, really? I don't know many INTJs, but the ones I do know have a charm to them that is often linked to the fact that they are unconventional and quite irreverent sometimes. Again, not a rule by any means, but INTJs are going to take a long time to even care about this aspect of their life, and only when they realize it's essential for their goals will they start to focus on it. So I think I can put them in highly unlikely. Okay, INTPs next. Contrary to some of these stereotypes, I don't think INTPs are terrible when it comes to the interpersonal. They might have a similar problem to ISTPs where people enjoy their company, but it's not always reciprocated. INTPs love to create logical frameworks and principles to deal with the world, and this extends to understanding people as well. There is a big difference when trying to put this into practice though, since those pesky emotions come into play. Still, they're going to have a softer vibe than the ISTPs, so I think I can put them in the possible category. Okay, ISFJ. ISFJs tend to love people, and without wishing to invoke more stereotypes, they tend to be pretty supportive and encouraging. They know how to bring out the best in people and can certainly, let's say, maneuver people when needed. Like all of the high FE users, they might struggle to be disagreeable and have difficult conversations, but this isn't a huge drawback. Plus, when ISFJs feel like loved ones have been wronged, you'll see plenty of disagreeableness. So I think they belong in the highly likely category along with their fellow high FE users. ISFP next. So my gut reaction is that they aren't going to be at the very top or the very bottom for this one. They tend to be unobtrusive with people and can have great empathy. If their boundaries are crossed, they'll reveal a much more fiery side, but they certainly aren't going to impose on others. ISFPs are very easy to get along with and are live and let live, generally speaking. I'm torn between possible and likely, but I'd be nice and put them in likely. Okay, ISTJ next. ISTJs have blind spot FE like INTJs, which does cause issues in this area. They call things like they see them and don't feel the need to soften the blow most of the time. When you add them having the rigidity that comes from SI and TE and the strongly held values that come from third slot FI, then you have a recipe for some contentious social interactions. I think I'm going to put them at the very bottom in unlikely. Finally, the ISTP. ISTPs often develop very clever strategies for dealing with people, such as avoiding them completely. That imbalance of having TI as the top function and FE as their bottom function is always going to pop up eventually. Lamenting the illogicality of people will be something of a recurring theme for them. They tend to be more liked by others than they like others. They don't have much tolerance for playing politics with people or dumbing things down. To be honest, I think I'm going to put them next to the INTJ and ISTJ at the very bottom here. There is a type of intelligence that initially I was going to include but left out. I might comment down below just briefly talking about that because it is quite interesting. Please like and subscribe if you haven't already, and also consider hitting the notification bell, for which you'll get 2 notifications from me each week. If you're interested in figuring out what your personality type is, feel free to visit our website where we type people, our Patreon if you want to donate, and then there are individual social media links such as another smaller YouTube channel I have where I post piano music, and an Instagram, a blog, so feel free to check all of those out.